This is a video from History Legends, which is usually very pro-Ukraine, to the point where I consider it the Ukrainian propaganda most of the time. Yet he just released a video called Ukraine's latest drone campaign did not go as planned. And let's have a look at that. Like and subscribe.
On the 25th of June, Ukraine announced a 40-day campaign to force Russia to sit at the negotiating table and effectively end the war. During this period, nearly 14,000 drones were launched against Russia. You've probably seen all the images.
Russians are really ticked about that, by the way, and they know that those drones were not made in Ukraine. They were made in various places in Europe, Italy, Germany, France, etc., and then shipped to Ukraine, Ukrainian flags stuck on them, and then shot into Russia. And it's made it so that it's possible that Russia might strike a NATO country, specifically the drone factories in a NATO country.
Just showing the aftermath of Ukrainian drone strikes.
Remember Asmongold getting all giddy about seeing all these destruction in Moscow?
We are winning!
Ukraine's 40-day countdown ended on August 4th, and it went largely unnoticed in the mainstream media.
Oh, well.
I think you know why. Because the entire operation failed.
Yep. Yeah. I can't even see where the drone was in this one, but by the fist pump in the air, I think it was hit.
Turns out Russian air defense is actually pretty effective. So not only Russia did not capitulate, but it's actually Ukraine that is desperately seeking an end to the war. The reality is that the entire drone strike campaign backfired harder than last time. All the Russian missiles are going through. Kyiv is getting hammered. The ports of Odessa are getting wrecked. Ukraine's merchant fleet is sinking. The New York Times even reported, amid intensifying Russian strikes, Ukraine's pleas for air defenses are falling flat. Ukraine is even desperately asking for a truce in the Black Sea. The situation is so critical that Ukraine also stopped reporting how many Russian missiles it intercepted. What a disaster.
Yes, Ukraine effectively has no air defenses anymore. I think towards the beginning of July, the Central Command for Ukraine's Air Force was hit by a Russian missile. And since then, they've effectively had no real air defense.
For this video, I prepared a bunch of maps for you. Get ready for a deep dive because we're going through an analytical approach to understand what was the real impact of Ukraine's drone strike campaign in Crimea, southern Ukraine, and Russia itself.
It's interesting. The video where he is less, just rah-rah pro-Ukraine is the video where he looks at the actual facts, and the actual facts don't tilt as heavily in Ukraine's favor.
And ultimately, we'll analyze Russia's response. Like Zelensky said in chapter 14, when you face an enraged bear, poke it some more. I already covered the drone strikes against Crimea on the 28th of June, so it will be interesting to follow up on my last report. But before we start, a quick word from today's sponsor. Nowadays, there's so many AIs to choose from, and I'll be honest, it can really feel overwhelming.
Or you can choose no AI.
Let's start from the very beginning. On the 27th of February 1942, German engineers Fritz Goslau and Robert Lusa sketched out the design of
Too far in the beginning. More recent. I need more recent.
An aircraft with a pulse jet above the tail. The basis for the future V-1 flying bomb. Just kidding. By late spring 1946, Ukraine needed a way to reassure its Western allies with, you guessed it, another offensive. Madness. But this time the reserves are dry. PFU did not want to lose even more soldiers. Good. So they had to think of something else. That's when Kirill Budanov had an idea. Instead of waging a war of attrition, Ukraine should strike.
Really, it was last year when the supposed Russian drone flew into Poland, into Polish airspace. That was the catalyst for European countries to decide on this drone offensive, because this was really a European offensive under the Ukrainian flag. All the drones made in Europe. So basically last year around, the first half of the year, they started making or preparing to make a large quantity of drones in Europe. And all that producing came online this year in time for this drone offensive.
Strike Russia asymmetrically. It's not something new. He already mentioned it in 2023 when he was the head of Ukraine's intelligence services. In this very interesting interview by The Economist, Budanov clearly stated that the Sum offensive was a bad idea. Instead, he suggested the focus should be drones and long-range missiles, weapons that can strike deep behind front lines. And that means the three objectives were to exhaust Russia's air defense systems, to disable military transport, and
the goal of the West in this proxy war in Ukraine is to balkanize Russia, to take out Russia as a functioning country and then loot its resources. That's the globalist elites, the corrupt elements of Europe. That is their goal. And this drone campaign, if it had managed to do more damage to the Russian economy, they thought it might have been a way to do that.
And bombers, and to damage military production facilities. Additionally, a secondary aim is psychological, seeding discontent among the population and disrupting normal economic processes inside Russia. This is exactly the layout of the plan that
Terrorism.
Ukraine would use in 2026, but two aspects of it would fail dramatically. Can you guess which ones? First of all, when Budanov laid out his plan in 2023, Ukraine could only rely on HIMARS and air-launched Storm Shadow missiles to strike deep inside enemy lines. In the end, all this weaponry was too expensive, too dependent on Western deliveries, and especially too few in numbers, meaning they could easily get detected and intercepted. Ukraine needed to find a way to conduct strikes on a much larger scale. The turning point was the great leap forward in drone technology. Since then, the AFU developed an entire array of long-range strike drones: FP1, FP2, AN-196 Lyuty, UJ-26 Bober, BARS, Marok, Sichem, Bulava, Ram-2X, and the US-made Hornet.
A lot of different drones, aren't there? All long-range drones are wing drones, because those are a lot more efficient over long distances than the helicopter ones. You know, the 4 propeller ones. Those are only for short range.
XNF XNF.
Have they tried racist jokes? I hear those are very offensive. Oh yes, for a moment I was, what in the world? No, you mean for Ukraine's offensive against Russia. Yes, just call Russian slurs. Well, I think they already do that, actually. They already do call Russian slurs in the Ukrainian army. I think any army at war with another country is usually calling the other side slurs. Nice to have you here, Zanef. Hornet drone.
Oh yeah, there's also the FP5, also known as the Flamingo, Ukraine's homemade ground-launched cruise missile. Wait, hold on a second. That's how hundreds of drones started flying towards Russia. But one of these operations was more ambitious than the others. On the 18th of June, 10 Ukrainian drones struck the Gazprom Neft oil refinery in the outskirts of Moscow. An event whose sensational images attracted the attention of the entire world. Huge towers of smoke. Moscow was on fire. This attack must have been some sort of blueprint.
Asmongold loved this attack.
Because exactly 1 week later, on the 25th of June 2026, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the start of a 40-day drone strike campaign whose political goal was to force Russia into a ceasefire.
Right.
Ukraine loves to give itself unattainable objectives to attain. This would be the start of Ukraine's largest coordinated long-range effort against Russia. Over 14,000 drones were launched during this period. Militarily speaking, this operation was meant to both
That's a
reclaim the
lot of
initiative from the
drones.
front line and take the war into Russian territory. Exactly the strategy Budanov laid out in September 2023. We can identify the 3 main areas of operation: Crimea, southern Ukraine, and of course, Russia itself. Let's start with Crimea. Ukraine's blockade of Crimea puts Putin's greatest victory under threat. Massive Ukraine drone attack knocks Crimea off power grid. Ukrainian drone strikes bring darkness to
Crimea is definitely the part of Russia that suffered the most from Ukrainian drones, because it's the closest to Russia and the hardest to defend, because the way you defend against these drones is with like machine guns, and that's harder to do over water. So it has had more strikes than elsewhere.
Crimea's summer. This is what the media reported. But what was the real impact of this drone campaign? First of all, you have to know that in this area of operations, Ukraine primarily relied on its new FP2 drones, a larger fixed-wing one-way attack drone designed for mid-range heavy strikes. The original configuration could carry a 105-kilogram warhead to a range of around 200 kilometers. But recent upgrades have increased its payload to a massive 200 kilogram, with a range of up to 370 kilometers. In effect, it serves as Ukraine's low-cost alternative to guided bombs. To make it simple for you, I mapped out all the targets that were struck by Ukrainian drones in Crimea from the 25th of June to the 4th of August. It took me so much time.
This is where propaganda breaks down, when you start looking at the facts. And if you have a channel that you actually did look at where the strikes were and everything like that, it's not surprising he came away with a different, let's say, opinion of how the Ukrainian drone offensive than in Western media.
Good thing I'm on the cut because this essentially means no more social life. Ask me about any settlement in Crimea and I'll give you the exact coordinates. Anyway, here's the summary. In total, 319 Ukrainian drones targeted Crimea between the 25th of June and the 4th of August. With visual confirmation, 58% of the drones struck energy infrastructure. In terms of targets, 77 electric substations and 3 fuel storage facilities were hit. However, it's important to note that we don't know if these electric substations were destroyed or to what extent there was damage. For sure, in the videos, we can see a lot of fire, but that's to be expected after a huge...
Yeah, substations, not the hardest thing in the world to repair.
Drone crash. Some of the bigger nodes were targeted over and over, which implied...
Yeah, look at this. If it's hit this many times, it means the first hits didn't destroy it. Or it's being repaired every time really fast.
they were still functional, or that they were quickly repaired. 28% against various military targets, of which a third against Russian airfields. The one Ukraine bombed the hardest is Gvardeskoye, with a reported 12 hits on target. Essentially, all the air bases in Crimea were hit, except the one in Katcha. Fun fact, Katcha was Russia's second military aviation school, and its first 24 graduates received their pilot qualifications in October 1911 from Tsar Nicholas II himself. 8% of Ukrainian drones targeted maritime logistics, and another 6% ground logistics, such as bridges and railway lines, including 2 strikes against a Wildberry supply hub. Is the Russian equivalent of Amazon, so yeah, definitely a very strategic.
Yeah, that's Ukraine getting desperate. When military targets, the high-value targets, are too defended, they then go to soft civilian targets. Yeah, Wildberry is an Amazon warehouse. It's nothing. Military isn't shipping any equipment through there.
Objective. In the timeline, we can also observe how the daily max was reached on July 3rd with 27 drone strikes. The next highest were the 20th of July with 24 Ukraine.
So the blue is the total number of drones Ukraine sent. The yellow is how many hit targets. I could say they did a really good job on, July 27th, where, look, nearly all of their drones hit. But then you have here where they sent huge number of drones and none of the targets hit. So Russia beefed up its air defense.
Ukraine drones against Crimea, and the 24th of July with 21 strikes. The most intense period stretched from the 25th of June to the 7th of July, or the first 2 weeks, as it accounted for 159 strikes, or roughly 50% of the total. And what happened after that? The most important information to complete this analysis is to figure out how many Ukrainian drones were shot down. According to Ukrainian sources, their unmanned systems forces launched about 1,746 drones against Crimea between the 25th of June and the 4th of August, of which 319 visually confirmed hits on target. That means a success rate of 18%. We can clearly see that Russian air defense was definitely active. On the 3rd of July, Ukraine launched 33 drones towards Crimea, of which 27 hit their targets. That's a success rate of 82%. But on July 30th, Ukraine launched an estimated 50 drones against Crimea, but only 11 drones passed Russian air defense, meaning a success rate of 22%. And even worse, on the 27th of June, only 3% of Ukrainian drones hit their targets. As you can see, it really varies from day to day. We can observe how Ukraine's hits on target rate dropped sharply after the 15th of July, from 25% to only 12%. It's not a coincidence, since during that period, there were 10 days where all Ukrainian drones were intercepted, and not a single strike was reported. So the follow-up question is, why did the drone strike campaign become less effective after?
Because Russia started having more machine guns in the area to shoot them down.
To the 15th of July. It's not because Ukraine became the most moral military in the world. That title is already taken, because during that period, they actually increased the number of drones launched towards Crimea by 10%. In my opinion, it's because the entire system became anti-fragile. Every time a position would be targeted in Crimea, repair crews would intervene. But we can also believe that they worked on reinforcing the structures from future strikes. Another reason is simply because Russia's air defense strategy simply became more effective. For example, on the 8th of August, the governor of Sevastopol reported, "Our military, aviation, air defense, and mobile fire groups repelled 2 attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces this morning. 35 drones were shot down, mostly over the sea and at a distance from the coast." So as you can see, there are multiple layers. The second line consists of hundreds of air observation posts, essentially anti-drone machine gun nests. Turns out the simple and low-cost method is particularly effective to defend stationary structures. It's very similar to how the Germans spammed countless Flak 88s during World War II around important factories. But it was also necessary to protect the highways. Russia's new thing is the standardization of mobilne огневые группы, or mobile
Those, for those who didn't catch the reference, these are, I believe, anti-bomber weapons. And so around important factories, they put a lot of anti-air defense. Makes sense.
aids during World War II around important factories. But it was also necessary to protect the highways. Russia's new thing is the standardization of mobilne огневые группы, or mobile fire groups. More on these units in a very short moment. In the end, the combination of increased manpower and reinforced structures could explain why, over time, it became harder and harder for Ukraine to achieve hits on targets. That could also explain how, after the 15th of July, Ukraine's only successes were reported against smaller electric substations located in the countryside that were likely undefended. So yeah, you're still going to have all the propaganda images, but the real impact on Crimea is going to be extremely limited. For sure, there were water cuts, power outages, and fuel shortages. The blackouts were more severe in some areas like the north of the Crimean Peninsula. This woman called Olga told the New York Times, power went off and didn't come back on even for an hour, for 15 days. They often had no running water either.
I had that happen to me too when Hurricane Sandy hit New York. Didn't have power for like a month. It sucked.
Ukraine's objective here? We know that targeting civilian populations is useless because they're much more resilient than we think. I think Kyiv just wants to punish the people of Crimea because they see them as traitors. Ukraine just ended up wasting a lot of resources against secondary targets. So the drone strike campaign against Crimea failed on a strategic level because Ukraine failed to destroy the key bridges linking Crimea to the mainland. Exactly what I told you in my previous reports. But the real center of gravity of Russia's logistics in Crimea are all these bridges. Because if they're destroyed, traffic and the flow of goods effectively goes to zero. Hear me out. Only when all these bridges are going to be destroyed, then, yes, we'll be able to say that Russia is in a very bad position. I think the first days of this 40-day campaign were destructive because Russia first concentrated its air defense and engineering capabilities around these bridges. And it paid off. The Russian headquarters probably considered electric substations to be a secondary objective compared to these bridges. And they're right. If these bridges are gone, it's GG well played. If the drone strikes against Crimea were a flop. We do have to mention how the AFU crippled Russia's maritime logistics by targeting vulnerable and exposed cargo vessels.
Except that all these attacking of ships by drones, especially in the Azov Sea, is what pushed Russia to do a complete blockade of the Odessa port and Ukraine's southern coastline. And nothing's getting in and out there now.
Russia and its navy a long history of disappointments. Here, the camera located on board the ship recorded a clear view of an incoming UAV, and in this footage as well. On this map, you can observe all the cargo ships that were struck near the Kerch Strait during this campaign. A real turkey shoot. Some sources claim that since the 6th of July, 218 Russian vessels have been targeted, 134 in the Azov Sea and 84 in the Black Sea. Many of the vessels were reportedly struck while waiting to enter port or to unload their cargo. And it's crazy to think that the Russians did not install any type.
He's doing the same thing as Critical Drinker and adding clips of The Witcher and different stuff in. I guess helps sell the video.
Of air defense equipment to protect these ships. Not even machine guns, I don't know. They were literally sitting ducks. So this operation carried out by Ukraine's unmanned systems forces definitely produced a noticeable result. It is not only disrupting Russia's maritime oil exports, but it also reduces the amount of fuel that can be transported by sea to Crimea. However, according to the latest news, Russian cargo ships are now installing anti-drone nets and Starlink jammers to complicate targeting. Next, we have to talk about the Ukrainian drone strikes against the R280 highway. This road follows the northern bank of the Azov Sea through Melitopol for 300 kilometers all the way into the Crimean Peninsula. Russian trucks have no other choice but to use this highway because driving over the large Crimean bridge in Kerch is impossible due to weight restrictions. Because you remember what happened last time. And like we just saw, the ferry service is constantly getting targeted by drones. This means the R280 highway is the critical lifeline of Crimea. The Ukrainian objective was to create an interdiction zone in southern Ukraine to strangle the peninsula. To do so, it made use of smaller, more versatile drones like the Bulava, Ram-2X, and US-made Hornet. So the Ukrainians tried to block the traffic along this highway by striking this bridge in Volodymyrivka. It's an important crossing point on the R280 highway 35 kilometers east of Melitopol. The bridge was effectively damaged and unusable. Yet a couple days later, Russian engineers were already building a secondary route parallel to the main bridge. Same thing that they did in Chonhar and all the other crossing points into Crimea. The system is becoming anti-fragile and thus more resilient to future Ukrainian drone strikes. If destroying the infrastructure was not possible, the only way for Ukraine was to...
Because they set up the temporary bridge and then they repaired the main bridge and now you have two bridges there.
physically destroy other trucks using this highway, or at least destroy enough of them to scare off the truck drivers. Between the 25th of June and the 4th of August, I mapped out 131 visually confirmed drone strikes along the R280 highway, 2.5 times less than against Crimea. Yet despite 40 days of intense drone strikes, no interdiction zone could be established. You will see a lot of videos online of burning Russian trucks along this southern corridor.
Yep.
Sometimes entire columns were targeted with spectacular images. But as always, this is cherry picking. In the end, this is just Reddit war prawn for NAFOs to fap on. But the reality, if we look at the figures, is that during the 40-day campaign, 54 Russian trucks going back and forth to Crimea were visually confirmed as destroyed. Not 54 per day, 54 during the entire period. At the same time, according to the website argumenti.ru, around 3,000 trucks per
So a month and a half, 54
day
trucks.
used the Novorossiya highway. How about we do the math together? 3,000 trucks times 40 days equals 120,000 trucks.
A lot of
Meanwhile,
trucks.
54 trucks destroyed out of 120,000 passages equals 0.045%. Turns out it's not that easy to hit moving targets. In other words, a Russian truck driver going to Crimea has 1 in 2,200 chances of getting targeted by a Ukrainian drone. I think mosquito bites were more annoying and a bigger problem for Russian truck drivers than Ukrainian drones.
The mosquitoes in that region are really nasty.
As a reminder, in my last video, in May it was 0.1% chances. It's 3 times less now, but wait, it gets better. After carefully scrutinizing all the hits, and that's why I'm happy I actually did the map, I realized many trucks were destroyed while stationary. And can you guess where? That's right, near gas stations. Like here and here. In this footage, we can see it clearly. That's normal. That's when the trucks are the most vulnerable. Poor Vladdy, he's been driving for hours. He just stopped to get some cigarettes and energy drinks to keep plowing. He turns his back and 2 seconds later, his truck is gone. Additionally, there are 2 hotspots. 30% of the trucks were destroyed in and around Melitopol, which can be explained since it's an important crossroad, but also because of its closer proximity with Ukrainian drone launch bases. And on top of that, another 25% around Berdyansk, which is the halfway point between Mariupol and Melitopol. Interestingly, only 5 trucks, or 10%, were targeted near the Chonhar.
So while trucks were hit, it didn't stop traffic through the region. And I will mention here something that peeves me a little bit is some of the drones that they used to hit trucks are AI. So they're programmed to look for military targets. But if they get down to 20% of their charge, they switch from looking for military targets to looking for anything that moves. That's why you have drones like diving in and blowing up 2 kids on bicycles and stuff like that. So I think that's terrible. That targeting, that switch to anything that moves is how you have a bus full of school kids get hit. It becomes terrorism at that point.
Our bridge, probably because this portion of the R280 highway is heavily defended by Russian air defense units. If Ukrainian drone pilots didn't find trucks on their usual hunting grounds, they would just fly along the highway looking for juicy targets. Now, to counter these UAVs, just like in Crimea, Russian forces massively deployed air defense checkpoints and mobile columns to patrol the R280 highway. Most of them consist of low-cost pickup trucks armed with machine guns. Some were maxed out as they were armed with twin mounts to increase the volume of fire. Russia found an even more low-cost answer to low-cost Ukrainian drones. But it's not sunshine and rainbows and free XP for these Russian mobile fire groups. In this video, we can see some of them being targeted by Ram-2X drones. So it goes to show that they're also at risk of being targeted. Overall, to protect the R280 highway, the Russian military deployed a multi-layered air defense system which includes radars, jammers, and early detection to warn mobile fire groups of incoming targets. But that's not all. Additionally, there are also drone teams whose only job is to patrol the sky and hunt down Ukrainian UAVs like this Hornet you can see on screen. And all this could explain why Ukraine's hit-on-target rate on the southern corridor was much lower than in Crimea. But that being said, these drone strikes did pin down a large number of Russia's manpower. Think about it, a handful of Ukrainian drone teams have effectively forced thousands of Russian troops to remain in defensive roles. And I think just for that, Ukraine's return on investment for this campaign was worth it. Anything
I disagree. Russia was already not committing all of its military forces to Ukraine. Let's go. U.S. military, Russian military. Military number of soldiers. 1.3 million active duty military personnel. Russian military number of soldiers in Ukraine. in front lines. So half, or a little more than half. So they already weren't using everything. So
Senko, and it says that they moved.
Thing that gets Russian soldiers away from the front is a win.
the reason Russia isn't using all its military power in Ukraine is, one, it's still technically a special military operation and not a all-out war. And second, because all of NATO is still a threat to Russia. It needs to defend its borders in case of a NATO invasion. And that's being serious. Remember the Kursk invasion out of Ukraine, where they suddenly crossed the border there. Russia needs to defend its borders. You never know what NATO will do.
Let's be honest, this is a good diversion. It barely cost anything to Ukraine in manpower. It's much better than the Kursk fiasco. Oh, you know what? That reminds me of something. Remember what I said a while back about Russia mobilizing its active reserve? So, in the end, the scheme could look like this. Step 1, reservists will be called to serve in mobile fire groups. To guard oil refineries, for example, protect them from drone strikes. Now it makes sense. This is where the troops are coming from. Apart from targeting bridges and trucks, starting in mid-July, Ukrainian drone units prioritized electric substations in southern Ukraine. But just like in Crimea, they wanted to make life hell for the population living in occupied territories. At first, it was those in the big urban areas of Melitopol and Mariupol that were struck.
Ukraine has been doing this since 2014, when this red part declared their independence from, Kiev. And they've been shelling them ever since and trying to make life hell in the breakaway region since then. It hasn't changed now that the war is going on.
As the Russians reinforced these nodes with improved structure or machine gun nests, the Ukrainians then started targeting substations in the countryside, but nothing that can truly change anything on a strategic level. Now, I have to admit that there's one blind spot. I didn't cover Ukraine's extensive drone strike campaign against military logistics in Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. The reason is simple. We have the number of Russian trucks that were hit, but we don't have the total number of Russian trucks that were active in this area during these 40 days. So it's very hard to actually pull out an analysis on the effectiveness of these drone strikes. However,
Considering Russia continued advancing throughout the summer, I'm thinking their logistic is more or less still functional.
do have a lot of data on Ukrainian drone strikes against Russia's critical infrastructure. Ukrainian drones batter Russian oil facilities. Ukrainian drones have struck nearly every major Russian refinery. This is what the media kept hammering about. Ukraine's main workhorses for deep strikes into Russia are the FP-1 and AN-196 Lyuty, both long-range one-way attack drones capable of carrying warheads of several dozen kilograms over hundreds of kilometers. But hidden among these swarms of smaller drones is the FP-5, also known as the Flamingo. This is Ukraine's new ground-launched cruise missile. It's cheap to produce, carries a massive 1,000-kilogram warhead, and has a reported range of up to 3,000 kilometers. And you know what? It even has similar specs to the Tomahawk, but at a much lower cost, about 4 times less. Shut it down! However, the Flamingo comes with several drawbacks. Its large size can penetrate deeper, but gives off a significant radar and infrared signature, which makes it easier to detect. Meanwhile, its relatively simple satellite-based guided systems makes it less capable of navigating through heavily contested environments. So with this type of rod, you really need to get lucky. But when it happens, boy, the explosion is huge. There's this interesting Twitter page called Drone Bomber. He reported that between January and July 2026, there were 69 Ukrainian strikes on 28 oil refineries, 36 confirmed strikes on 30 oil depots, 21 strikes on 10 oil terminals and port infrastructure.
As someone who watches a military summary channel, the daily reports, I can confirm that they've been hitting oil facilities all summer.
Sure. As you can imagine, this really hurts Russia's export potential.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Additionally, a lot of Wildberries warehouses and logistics centers were hit. Okay, what is the strategic objective here? Is Ukraine secretly trying to piss off Russian women?
I like that he isn't saying it's good that they're attacking Wildberry. It's not. It's like attacking an Amazon warehouse. It's just to disrupt civilian life and kill civilians. Civilians were killed in a lot of these attacks on Wildberries.
Ukraine Security Services, the SBU, claimed that over a 40-day period...
I don't think he's going to mention the even worse attacks, like the drone strikes against a school bus of kids. Ukrainian... Or the dormitory with a drone strike bus kids. In June 17th, 2020, 26, Russian and Belarusian authorities reported that a drone struck a bus carrying a Belarusian child's soccer team in the Russian border region of Bryansk, killing one adult and injuring several others, including children. So, yeah, the Wildberry refineries are one thing. The drone strikes against school bus full of children is, I don't think that defendable in any way.
Struck 14 oil refineries and dozens of fuel depots. Additionally, United 24 reported that all 11 of Russia's largest oil refineries have now been hit by Ukrainian aerial weapons. Some have been forced to suspend operations either completely or partially. Ukraine has demonstrated that there are no unreachable targets for it. According to Reuters, Ukraine disrupted approximately one-third of Russia's refining output. For example, the Moscow oil refinery in Kapatnia, already hit twice in June, reportedly won't resume production before 2027. And that's the thing, every time
I've heard different reports that it has already resumed operations. Frankly, given the size of the refinery, I think the truth might be between that it partially resumed operation, and maybe it won't resume full operations until 2027.
refinery is repaired. Then the Ukraine is attacked again. Back to square one. The Allies did the same thing during their bombing raids during World War II. I have to admit that all the information I just gave you comes from either the Ukrainian or the Western side.
Yes, that is a very important caveat. Because, yes, like the fact that the refinery won't be open until 2027. It's from Western estimates that are trying to sell this war.
I could barely find anything coming from the Russians. Nonetheless, Ukraine's strike campaign did not have the expected effect. Because the Russian economy has not collapsed. For sure,
True.
It's not in the best shape, but it's still standing. Maybe I'm harsh on Ukraine, but that's the reality that we can see. To be fair, I'm not an economics expert. But essentially, while Russia's refineries were undergoing repairs, the country had no other choice but to export crude oil instead. Of course, at a discount. So at least they could get some
This is one reason that diesel prices are exploding, is the taking off of all this refinery infrastructure in Russia. Normally, Russia exports diesel. Now, because of all this, it's exporting oil and importing diesel. So that means more oil to the world, less diesel. And that explains the crack spread, the fact that refineries in the United States are buying oil cheaper because there's more oil available, but there's less diesel. And that's why we might be heading for a diesel shortage very soon.
revenue. And here's the trick. Russia exported its crude to Belarus and Kazakhstan, since these refineries are safe from Ukrainian drone strikes, and then Russia re-imported it for its domestic use. But hold on, there's more. Some of the crude oil that Russia exported to Kazakhstan was repackaged under
People-
Kazakh flag and then shipped around the world. And plot twist, that's when the US intervened. On the 8th of August, Bloomberg reported US says Ukraine to avoid targeting tankers, mainly to allow Kazakhstan to export its oil and gas. So as you can see, Russia was playing the same shell game gypsies are scamming naive tourists in Europe with.
The problem is with hitting oil targets and sanctions, etc., is there's always two parties to every transaction. Yes, you cut Europe off from Russian oil. That deprives Russian of some revenue. It has to sell the oil cheaper somewhere else. But that also deprives Europe of cheap Russian oil. And that hurts Europe too. And that's why Germany's deindustrializing. And right now, the oil shortage, the Trump administration wants all the oil possible on the high seas.
with. According to Rybar, now that many Russian refineries are operational again, gasoline is returning to petrol stations, and the shortage is not nearly as severe as it was.
Yeah, right now, the shortages are practically over in Russia. I will add to that during the summer, every year in Russia, there is gasoline shortages. It's just this poorly designed distribution system for gasoline, and they always have shortages. This year, it was significantly worse than usual because of the drone strikes, but the summer is now more than half over, and I don't think there's going to be any more shortages because of that.
A month ago. However, Rybar warns that this fuel crisis could resurface and that strengthening the protection of oil facilities should be Russia's #1 priority. Do you remember what I told you at the beginning of the video? When I laid out the initial plan by Budanov, he specifically mentioned strikes on Russian military production facilities. And this is exactly what the Ukrainians did since the beginning of 2026 with a peak in June. But this was followed by a sharp drop in July with only 4 strikes. The only significant one of those is the Flamingo strike against a missile factory in Kirov. Still, according to Drone Bomber, since January, There have been 105 Ukrainian strikes against oil refineries or oil
This is what really pisses Russia off, these strikes against factories, because the drones that are doing these strikes, the missiles that are doing these strikes, even like the Flamingo, those aren't being made in Ukraine. So Russia can't bomb the factories where they're being made, and they're doing damage to Russian manufacturing. That's why there's a hard line in Russia that says, let's just retaliate. They hit our factories, we hit the factories in Europe, in France, Germany, Italy, etc., where they're making the drones that are hitting our factories. And so far, Putin has resisted that pressure. But he's beginning to give in to the pressure of the hardliners. You can see that in A, how hard they're bombing Ukraine. B, the fact they shut down Odessa. And C, the fact that they have now an established naval doctrine of seizing EU ships in retaliation for any Russian ship seized. So they haven't yet struck a NATO country with a missile. But Russia has now escalated seriously on its side in 3 different ways. And, well, we have to wait and see if they ever cross the line of striking a NATO state. And if they do, I think it'll be targeting a factory where these drones are made.
Compared to 17 against military industrial facilities. 6 times less. I think the logic for the Russian headquarters was very similar to the situation in Crimea, where Russia had to prioritize the defense of key bridges and electric substations were a secondary objective. It's the same thing here. Maybe that Russia concentrated all its air defense capabilities to protect its military production sites, and it must have considered oil refineries as of lower importance. Another very important objective for the Kremlin was to defend the sky over Moscow. From Drone Bomber, we learned that the Russian armed forces established a multi-layered air defense network to protect the capital. 6,225 drones flew towards the capital region in July alone. 780 of them were intercepted on the approaches to Moscow. Now, of the 1,500 interceptions that could be geolocated, around 1,400 drones, approximately 93%, were intercepted on the first and second defensive lines in the region. Around 100 drones, or 6%, reached the third defensive line around the Moscow Ring Road, while only 1 drone managed to reach Moscow itself, or 0.07%.
Yeah, that's a lot of wasted drones.
Drone Bomber's conclusion is the following. Against the backdrop of thousands of launches, this is not even a drop in the ocean. It is almost ridiculous. If the strategy was to force Russian air defenses to waste all their ammunition in this area, it has failed. Their systems remain operational, their missile stocks appear sufficient, and the defensive ring is working. Once again, the only way we can think this is maybe positive for Ukraine is that numerous Russian air defense units positioned along the front had to be redeployed towards Moscow or deep inside Russia. So once again, less Russian military personnel on the front line. Now, all this wouldn't be so bad if the entire plan didn't backfire.
Bam.
Destroyed by the ACLED in the New York Times. Russia's growing attacks on gas stations.
Yes, this is the backfiring part. Growing attack on gas. And the reason they're attacking gas stations is because all these drones were being launched from trucks. And these trucks were loading up their drones farther to the west in Ukraine, driving over to the east, and they're using gas stations and then continuing to drive, fire their drones, fuel up on the way back. And so by hitting these gas stations, they greatly complicated the launching of drones against Russia.
In Ukraine, we can observe a sharp increase starting mid-June. By the 4th of August, 250 Ukrainian gas stations were destroyed, of which 200 in June and July alone. This is clearly in retaliation for Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian oil refineries.
Yes.
Russian civilians are going to queue for gas.
Not just in retaliation. It was also directly where they targeted was the gas stations along highways that the trucks were using to refuel to go over and launch their drones. And so it was to complicate logistics for the drone operations on Ukraine's side.
Same thing is going to happen for the Ukrainians. As you can see on the map, these attacks were concentrated on gas stations close to the front lines. The goal is simple: make life impossible for the local civilian population. Reminds you of something, but that's only the tip of Russia's response.
Well, that's exactly what Ukraine is trying to do to Crimea and the Donbass region. So both sides are doing that.
Because Russia also unleashed its firepower at the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv.
Yep. Boom, boom.
Typically, every 3 days or so, a missile salvo would hit the city. Between the 25th of June and the 4th of August, we can estimate that Russia launched well over 300 missiles at Kyiv, since Ukraine barely has any Patriot interceptors left. Only about 7 out of 150 Iskander missiles were shot down. On the 24th of July, the Russians attacked in daytime.
Ukraine practically doesn't have any air defense left.
At least 2 Russian Iskander M ballistic missiles struck an arms exhibition for the Armada Drone Company. The exhibition was advertised on social media with the time and date. The official toll is 10 deaths and 100 wounded, but it was an open location and the event attracted up to 1,000 people. As you can see, nothing is
Yeah, 1,000 people here, and that's what's left afterwards.
left. The casualties are probably much higher.
Agreed.
The strikes on the night of August 4th were also particularly deadly. 15 civilians lost their lives and another 47 were injured. Overall, Russia concentrated its strikes on energy infrastructure as well as logistics, warehouses, and distribution centers. For example, that's how a Volkswagen factory was turned to ashes. I think Ukraine has no other choice but to invoke Albert Speer. So we talked about how Ukraine wanted to bring down the Russian economy, namely by striking oil refineries and Russia's oil export.
Brutal, yes, yes. Ukraine did this idiotic idea to do this drone expedition. And they publicized it to the world. They didn't say where it was happening, but they said when it was happening. And, I mean, for Russia, it's not hard to find out where a drone expedition that 1,000 people are going to. Yeah, they're going to find out where that is. And so they sent missiles into it. So, yeah, all these experts on drones getting killed. That, honestly, was retarded on Ukraine's part to publicize this drone expedition.
We wanted to bring down the Russian economy, namely by striking oil refineries and Russia's oil export terminals. This is where the Kremlin played this card and looked at Odessa, essentially Ukraine's only access to the outside
Yeah, Uno reverse.
world economy. Russia hammered the place over and over. Between the 10th and the 25th of July, AMK reported that Russia has launched close to 200 missiles of various types at the Odessa, Chornomorsk, and Yuzhny ports in Odessa oblasts. 200 in 2 weeks! For example, on the 13th of July, Russia fired 12 Kh-59-69 cruise missiles, at least 42 Geran-2 drones, and 3 operator-controlled Geran-4 jet drones.
Yeah, Russia has decided nothing is getting in and out of Odessa anymore. Not only destroying the ports, destroying any ship trying to go in and out. It's a disaster for Ukraine.
Primarily on the port of Chornomorsk. On the 18th of July, 4 Kh-59-69 cruise missiles, 4 P-800 Onyx supersonic cruise missiles, 2 Iskander M ballistic missiles, 6 Banderol jet drones, and a number of Geran-2 drones. Ports, terminals, and warehouses were the main targets. Ukraine exported 80% of its grain through this gate, and now
It did.
it's shattered. This is a strategic disaster because Ukraine essentially lost access to the Black Sea. That's not all. Do you remember Ukraine's Azov Sea cargo vessel Turkey shoot? Well, Russia did the exact same thing with its new Geran-4 jet drones. 12th of July, 16th of July, 2 vessels on the 18th, 3 on the 31st, 3rd of August, 6 on the 4th, including some docked in the port of Mykolaiv, 3 on the 5th of August. Whatever deal that was done in 2022 to allow Ukraine to export its grain abroad by the sea is gone. The
Yep.
gloves are off. Ukraine desperately asked for a truce in the Black Sea, which Russia rejected.
Asked for a truce in Black Sea after Ukrainian drone campaign targeting Russian ships across the region, both the Azov Sea and the Black Sea, and then it wants a ceasefire. Yeah, right.
And then Odessa was hammered again on the night of August 9th. 13 missiles were launched from Crimea and none were intercepted by Ukrainian air defense. It was one of the worst nights for the city. Ports and terminals are gone, cargo vessels are gone. You might say, what about the railway? The 2 bridges to Romania also got targeted. The Zatoka Bridge already collapsed on August 1st, and now it's the Mayaki Auto Bridge, a critical freight link to Danube port that took a direct hit as well. Now Ukraine's grain transportation has to be done exclusively by road towards the western border. Yeah, through Poland. It seems that it's now the Ukrainian economy that might get crippled. That's when we have to really ask ourselves, was this 40-day drone strike campaign, this gamble, worth it for Ukraine? I'll let you be the judge of that. Even the US doesn't understand Ukraine's strategy. What you have to know is that Russia is said to have stocked up on their missile arsenal. Ukrainian reports suggest that Russia has at least 430 caliber cruise.
Yes, Russia is worried about war with Europe. It's not going to spend everything it has on Ukraine. So they've stocked up on all this. And, yeah, the Iskander missiles, Oreshnik missiles. It's stocking up of those, for example. It's barely used them. And it has probably between 50 and 100 of them now.
Cruise missiles, 130 Iskander K, 130 Zircons, and 120 Kinjal hypersonic aeroballistic missiles available. All this in the hands of the commander of the Russian aerospace forces that Ukraine tried to assassinate a couple of days ago. Meanwhile, The Guardian reported NATO to urgently get air defense for Ukraine, because Zelensky is desperately seeking for more.
From where? Who's going to give them missiles? Certainly not the United States. It's running out, let me give you an idea how bad it is. It's running out of air defense missiles to give to Israel. You think it's going to give missiles to Ukraine over Israel? You're crazy. But Ukraine might convince some countries in Europe to give up their air defense. They managed to do that in Poland. I think 70 Patriot air defenses or something was transferred to Kiev recently from Poland, and it was a huge role in Poland because that was basically Poland's air defense.
Patriot interceptors. Yeah, it's not looking good. That's all I have for you today. Let me know what you thought of my analysis. If you
Yes, I think that for Ukraine, the drone offensive backfired. If you think of it as Europe's drone offensive, well, why do they give a shit about what happens in Ukraine? They just wanted to hurt Russia, and it succeeded in hurting Russia. So it's just, Ukraine is a launching platform, a very convenient launching platform. They can make any weapon, any drone they want, send it over to Ukraine, and then shoot it off from Ukraine into Russia to weaken Russia. That is how European leaders view Ukraine. I mean, its population, its infrastructure, its people, all being sacrificed. Like its farmers are now going to get completely screwed by the fact that they can't export their grains anymore. So, yeah. For Ukraine, though, yes, I do think the drone campaign has been somewhat of a disaster. Because these drones might be made in Europe, but they're being fired from Ukraine, and it's Ukraine that Russia's hitting in retaliation. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe, come watch and kick our Twitch, and I'll see you next video. Bye.